and welcome to Dressed Up. On today's episode, we're going to talk about dress fittings. The dress fitting is an essential part of buying your dress. After all, it is what makes it 100% your gown. So we're going to go into all the different things that you need to make sure that your dress gets tailored properly and really why you need a fitting. So let's get started. So let's talk about what a dress fitting is. A dress fitting is when you schedule an appointment with either a bridal tailor, fitter, or seamstress, and they make the necessary changes to your dress. Generally, it's going to take about 1 to 3 fittings. It's nearly impossible to get that dress to fit you perfectly at the first fitting, so make sure you give yourself adequate time for that. And the reason why you really need to have a dress fitting is because you can have the most expensive, most beautiful dress, but if it doesn't fit you properly, it's not gonna look right and you're not gonna have that wow factor that you're wanting. I mean, just think about any time that you've watched a celebrity on the red carpet and maybe they just didn't have the time to get it properly fitted for them. And it may have been, like one of the most beautiful designer gowns, but if it's not tailored to them perfectly, it loses that factor. And that's the same thing with your wedding gown. I mean, it's your day to shine, and you want to make sure that you make this gown 100% you and your look. So when you go in and you order your dress, they are going to take all of your measurements. And they're going to take those measurements and they are going to base it on a sizing chart. Now, each designer has a different sizing chart, and they're going to base it off of that and order the dress according to that size. Most of us don't fit those sizing charts perfectly. So with that being said, it is essential that you do schedule a fitting, because there's odds are you're going to have something taken in or let out a little bit, because it's not going to fit properly in those certain areas. I mean, unless you're maybe 5'7" or taller and you're planning to wear 3.5-inch heels at least, then you may not need alterations, but for most people I would say at least schedule one fitting. So there are 2 types of alterations that you can get done at your fitting. The first one is going to be basic hemming. So that's going to be if you want some length taken off of the bottom, if you want to maybe narrow in the waist a little bit, let out a little bit on the bust line, or add to the bust line. Essentially, those are going to be the 3 most basic alterations that you can get done. That is going to be mostly essential. That's where most people need stuff taken in or let out. Either the bust needs to be adjusted, the waist needs to be adjusted, sometimes even the hips need to be adjusted depending on if it's more fitted. That usually, because where everyone's hips and legs and all go in, it's always different on every single person. We all have different proportions. So usually those are going to be the most customary. And with bridal sizing, they tend to be a little bit longer. So unless you're super tall, usually, it's going to have to be taken up a little bit. Sometimes, if someone is super tall, they can also add fabric. But that is a little bit more of an extensive alteration, and that's going to be the second one, which is basically customization, and that's adding on details. So anytime that you want to add on a detail, it's obviously going to drive up the price a little bit more. But there's several things that you can really do to change up a dress. So you don't really have to go in and just assume that the dress that you buy off the rack that's the only option. I mean, there's so many things that you can do to it. First off, say your dress, this dress right here it's kind of more of a sleeveless dress. Say you want sleeves on it. You can actually get them to add sleeves onto the dress. You can do different types of sleeves, whether you want to do lace or tulle. Sometimes you may have to go through the designer. Other times you may be able to go right through the seamstress. Of course, if you are going through the designer, it is going to take a little bit longer. Other things you can do is say you want to add on some beading. You can definitely do that. Again, that will drive up the price a little bit more, but it is, if that's something that you really saw in your dress and that dress just doesn't have it, you can definitely have that added on. Say you want to add in some like appliques, like more of these little lace, prints, you can definitely have that added on. That's, again, a little bit pricier, but something you can add. If you want to do, say, a different belt, you can do that. Even if you want to do like a longer train on the dress, say you wanted something that's a little bit longer than the dress already has, you can have that added on. Again, adding on extra fabric is always a little bit pricier because you're dealing with more fabric. And again, sometimes people want to have, a fuller skirt than what's on the dress. So you can actually have a full, another skirt made on. And then even some people, to kind of create the 2-in-1 looks, they will also add on those alterations. So really, this is the time to get that all done. And with that being said, timing is essential for this. So I say, it's always been standard that you give at least 3 months for your first fitting. Because we're having a lot of production delays, designers are really backed up from last year. So I would definitely give yourself at least, I would say, especially if you're doing, and that's for the most basic stuff, but I would give yourself about 4 to 5 months. And then if you are doing anything, like I said, adding on sleeves, it's really, high, customization stuff, that I would say would take, you can go anywhere from like a year to like at least 10 months. I would give at least 10 months because I would err on the side of caution. The last thing you want is to get to your wedding and, have to worry about your dress getting there on time and being done on time. So make sure you schedule that adequate time. And like I said earlier, it usually takes 1 to 3 fittings. It's, it's very customary. So because it takes some time to get that dress to fit you properly, you may be like fluctuating on weight. So make sure that you counter in that time and factor in that time for at least 3 fittings if need be. So let's talk about what to expect and what to bring to your fittings. First thing, it's gonna take about an hour ideally for your fitting. So make sure you schedule adequate time. Try not to put anything after because you don't want to feel like you're rushed. You really want to be able to take the time to go through everything, make sure all the measurements and everything's done properly, and that you're inspecting the dress, making sure everything is as it should. So, make sure you have like a good breakfast, a good meal before, turn off your phone, just, try not to be too distracted because you really, this is a very important time and you want to make sure that you do that properly. So really plan to take in about, an hour for that. I would say the things that you're going to need to bring would be, 1, the pair of shoes that you plan on wearing. It's essential that you bring those shoes, because you don't want to be wearing, a different pair of shoes and have it, change your measurements. That can totally, throw off everything if you, wear one pair of heels and then later get the heels that you want and they're like maybe say 3 inches taller, half an inch taller, and it just throws off those measurements. Again, you should have one to 2 more fittings after that first one, but it's just easier, to take off more length rather than add on. That's a huge thing. Not a huge thing, but it can be, a headache if you don't have enough, fabric for that. You may have to order more. So it's just always better to make sure you bring those shoes. Also, make sure you bring the undergarments that you plan on wearing. Because, say you wear a smaller, something smaller in the bust area or larger, that can really also change those measurements. So if it's, a bra that you say you're just always wearing and then you have an entirely different, set of lingerie that you're wearing that day, that can create, totally different measurements. So make sure you bring those. And then any shapewear that you plan on wearing that day. And I can't stress enough the importance of shapewear because it's kind of like the foundation of your look. It's kind of like, if you were to go and paint on a canvas without priming it, or even, put on makeup without a primer, it is what creates that seamless, canvas and foundation for your look. So it's going to make everything, go in all the right places, everything's gonna be smooth, you're not gonna have anything, you know, going up and down. And because those things, you know, I mean, usually shapewear is pretty thin, but sometimes that can also affect the way that your dress lays and how it frames your body. So if you bring those things with you, you know, you aren't gonna have any surprises, you know, the day of the wedding or anything, that it's gonna fit tighter than you thought it would. So make sure that you bring that all of the shapewear, everything that you're planning to, at least your final fitting, but I would say to all of them if possible. I would definitely bring a camera because it's a great way of kind of being able to, you know, track your progress. You know, your weight will probably be fluctuating, especially if you're trying to lose weight during this time period. You'll be able to see how this dress truly fits you, and then and kind of see what you need to do, what needs to change, and then you can remember back, because it can be overwhelming looking at it once and then trying to remember. It's a lot easier if you have visuals to go off of. And then with that, I would say make sure you bring at least 1 to 2 people with you. I wouldn't bring too many people because then it can get distracting and it can be hard to focus on your dress and all those things, because it is a little bit different than like actually shopping for the dress. So with this one, I'd bring maybe, you know, like a parent, and then maybe like the maid of honor or someone like a close friend. And ideally the person that, if you do get a bustle, the person that will be doing that bustle so that they can see it. I think it's always good to have someone that has another visual on it, making sure that everything looks good, and they're kind of like another set of eyes and ears that are supporting you, and it just makes it a fun and much more enjoyable experience as well. I would also say make sure that you bring any accessories that you're planning to wear, whether it's like, you know, hair accessories. That way you'll have everything together, you know what everything's gonna look like. It's just, I always say plan ahead. It's always better to have all of those things with you. You know, even if it's like another belt or something you want to wear on top, it's always good to make sure you see how everything looks together, and that, you know, that seamstress and dress fitter, they know that's, you know, they have the skill set. They know if something needs to be changed even on one of those accessories, they can also help with that. So you know, if you are struggling, like, should I bring it, should I not bring it, I would definitely err on the side of bringing it, rather than, you know, because you can never have too many things to play around with, and you can never be overly prepared. And the number of fittings that you're going to need is going to depend on the scope of work. So if you're really doing a lot of customization on your dress, you're definitely gonna need a higher number of fittings. And then finally, I would say make sure you anticipate what, you know, your final weight is gonna be. I know it can be kind of hard to determine that. I would say most brides tend to lose weight, and they tend to lose more weight than they expect during the process, because it is a stressful time. You know, usually you're very busy, so odds are you're gonna be losing more weight, but also make sure you're not being overly ambitious. You know, it's much easier to take things in than to add more fabric. So I, again, would err on the side of caution. You know, it's easier to take more alterations in as you go on, but I would kind of slow, don't take too much off in the beginning, and don't be overly ambitious with that weight, because it's, you know, it's easy to like think like, oh, I'm gonna lose this amount of weight. If it doesn't happen, say something happens, it's better to be able to take more off at your final fitting. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts when it comes to your fitting. First and foremost, do make sure you give yourself an adequate amount of time. In terms of ordering, make sure you do about 8 to 12 months, because we're seeing, again, a lot of production delays, and a lot of designers are based in different countries, or where they source their fabrics are in different countries. So make sure you give, I'd say, about a year, but 8 to 12 months is usually good. That way, you know, you get it ordered in time, and then for the actual fitting, at least 3 months before the wedding for your first fitting. So that way you have like enough time, not having to worry about, again, not having your dress ready for the day of the wedding. So the second thing is, don't wear any self-tanner or limit the amount of makeup that you wear to any of your fittings. And Reason being is the last thing you want is to have to clean your dress, before your wedding. I mean, of course you can get that done, but it is a costly expense and it's another headache because every time that you're not having your dress in your possession, it is a risk and it is a little bit of a liability. Of course, if you're doing any self-tanner, just make sure, say you're doing it in the summer, make sure you're not, putting anything on, I'd say 1 to 2 days before your fitting because, especially if it's in the summer, you may get hot, and if you start to perspire, it can get on your dress. Even if you think like it's, I've already showered, everything, again, that's the last thing you want. You do not want that transfer. So make sure, and even with makeup, you don't want anything getting on it. So keep that in mind. Another thing that you should not do is, again, do not wear any shoes that are different than the pair that you're planning to wear for the wedding. That could throw off those measurements, so make sure that you bring those shoes and you really aren't even, borrowing shoes from like the seamstress. Make sure you have your own. That is very vital. One thing that you should do is make sure you familiarize yourself with the bustle, and even if you've got somebody else, and you should have, really someone else, viewing that bustle and how it all works. Make sure that you become familiar with it yourself, because you're going to be able to tell, like, usually it takes more than one person to do that bustle. And with that being said, you want to be able to say, like, and at least an idea of where those loops and where those buttons are. And of course, it's pretty ideal to make sure you get a video of it, because you guys may think that you're going to remember it, but you may not. And I would definitely bring those people that are going to be doing that bustle, bring them with you. I mean, even as a wedding planner, I myself have gone to those fittings. I just think it's a better way to be prepared. Make sure you bring those people, because it's a stressful point of the night when you're trying to get that done. So make sure you have at least that visual on it, you're kind of familiar with it. And that's kind of brings me to another point, is the actual bustle does not come with the dress. So make sure you factor that in. If you do want to bustle, you're doing a dress that has some kind of train, odds are you're going to want to do at least, I've seen anything even from like only one button, you can do 3 buttons, and I've seen some with up to 40, buttons that you have to bustle. So it's all about the intricacies of the way that the dress lays and all the details that it has. Some dress fitters will even color code all of the loops and the buttons. That is a lifesaver. If they can do that, I would definitely recommend that, because that's gonna save time, that's gonna save such a headache, because usually it's at night, you're trying to see where everything goes, and you think you know where all of that stuff is, but you may not. So I really advise, if they have that system, I would opt for that, even if it costs a little bit more. One thing that you should do is make sure you invest in a good seamstress that specializes in alterations, and specifically bridal alterations. I cannot stress this enough. I would not just go to your typical tailor. Like, you need someone that does this, day in and day out, that this is their livelihood. This is what they know. They have years of experience working on dresses. They know how to make a dress fit you properly. They know what is going to be the most beautiful, how to work with each of those fabrics and those details. The last thing you want is to have your dress, something happen to it because, you took it to someone, maybe you wanted to save a little bit of money, and you took it to someone that doesn't necessarily specialize in bridal alterations. That is not, you don't want to be in that situation. So I would say, again, it's kind of the final part of making sure your dress is cohesive. So it is a good investment. Make sure you go with that. So that brings me to my next point, which is make sure you factor in the amount and the price of those alterations into your wedding budget and your dress budget. So your whole wedding attire should equal about 10% of the entire wedding budget. So that's everything from, your dress, all of your accessories, to the groom's, all of his stuff. You want to make sure that you're factoring in those alterations. They can range anywhere from say like $200 all the way up to $1,000, depending on, how much customization you're going to do. So make sure, that's a big part of the budget. So you don't want to, get to that point and then feel like you don't have enough room. I mean, that is literally part of the dress. So make sure you're factoring that in. So another thing that I would recommend is really, like, if you find yourself wanting to change too many things about the dress, I would maybe opt for another dress. So I wouldn't try to change too many things, because again, that is gonna really drive up the prices, the more customization that you do. So it may be better to go, the semi-custom route, even custom route, or just go for another dress. Because if there's too many things that you're wanting to have done, it may just not be the right dress. But if it's, you just want a few things added, then of course, that's definitely the way to go. Another thing that I would say is don't panic if the dress isn't fitting you perfectly by the second fitting. It definitely takes time for a good dress fitter to make everything fit properly. So, usually it's not gonna be, exactly that way on the second fitting. That's why you usually have that third fitting. So if your weight is still fluctuating, don't freak out. Just rest assured the seamstress is they're gonna bring things in, they're gonna do whatever they need. It's definitely nothing to stress over. So another thing is that you should, if you are trying on different veils and stuff, make sure you do a bunch of different options. You want to see how everything looks together, and depending on like the size of your head, face shape, even your hairstyle, those things can change a lot as the dress gets fitted. So I think it's very important that you try as much on as possible. And then finally, this is your time to investigate everything meticulously. So I would say, don't feel like you're being a picky bride. I would go through each element of the dress, and this is that time that you find, any loose bead, any snagged fabric, anything that's, maybe barely torn or needs to be, fixed. This is the time to do it, and you're in the hands of someone that is going to be able to make those tweaks and changes, and it's going to be much harder later on. So make sure you're really going through everything with a fine-tooth comb and making sure that the dress is exactly how you want it. So let me tell you, it's definitely important to make sure if you are doing any customizations to your dress, take into account how things are going to look. I once had a bride that decided there was this dress that, was a semi-custom dress, and it had a lining in there that was more of kind of a skin tone almost, and she decided that she wanted it to be, very bridal, more of a white lining under. But of course, all of the little appliques on the dress, they didn't pop the same way when there was the all white lining. It's very different because you're not gonna have, obviously when you do a different color underneath, that inlay is gonna make those pop. So when she got it, she realized, oh no, this is not at all what I wanted. I actually want the other lining. So I had to go and look into with the designer, see if we could get them to, get some other lining. Well, it turns out, since we were going with a very high-end designer, and the fact that it was overseas, to get that extra fabric, it was gonna be as much as that first dress. So, or that whole dress, it would be like a whole nother dress. So I ended up having to go to fabric stores in the design center and find the perfect inlay to make sure, we were able to make it work. Because at the end of the day, she was already spending, a pricey penny on that dress, and we didn't want to have to be able to just go and order a whole new dress or any of that. She was very upset, but I'm like, you know what? We're gonna get this figured out. And luckily, the amazing seamstress was able to do it, and the dress looked phenomenal. So I think it just goes to show the power of hiring a good seamstress and making sure that you're able to visualize how things are going to look when you're ordering that dress and making those alterations. I cannot stress enough that it is vital that you get to know that bustle before the wedding. I once had a bride that literally had 45 loops on her bustle. She said, she actually had 2 dresses, and she said she didn't want to have to, deal with the bustle. She was like, even though she had the bustle added on, she decided she wasn't going to deal with it. But then when time came, she decided, actually, I do want my dress bustle. And there was no video on it. No one knew how to do it. It literally took 5 people, and I kid you not, 30 minutes to do that bustle. So really take that time, get to know it, and I cannot stress enough, record it, have visuals on it, because you do not want to have what happened in this situation. The mom decided to release everyone for dinner before the bride even made her entrance. But yeah, we don't want that happening. So make sure you get that bustle familiarized and bring those people with you that are going to be doing it, because that's just one less thing you want to stress about at your wedding. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching this season of Dressed Up. I hope you found it super helpful when deciding all of your bridal look, and it's been so much fun being able to give you all the inside of all these tips and tricks, and I can't wait to bring out more stuff for you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and once again, thanks for watching. I'm Rachel, and this is Dressed Up.